Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Sean. I'm the Nerd Doctor, here to diagnose what's wrong with your RPG game and here to help you fix it. Though this channel is dedicated to ICRPG, you can't play any RPG game without some kind of initiative system. I talked about ICRPG's initiative system in my first two videos, ICRPG is better than D&D, and how to play ICRPG. And just so you know, don't have to go watch them. I'll mention a little bit more about that briefly. And I know that everyone does an initiative video, but I don't think enough people talk about no initiative, and I will be going over that later in this video. But first, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, as it will ensure that I keep coming out with the video content you love to listen and watch. For most of the initiatives, I'm going to be ranking them based on there being one monster versus the players. Many know these as boss battles. Combats where there are a bunch of monsters are always interesting, but nothing is worse than an anticlimactic boss battle. So at the bottom of the rankings, number 6, Group Initiative. Group Initiative is when the players and the monsters each make a roll, and whoever wins goes first. Monster or the players. Look, any initiative system that is going to result in all the players taking their turns before the monster, excluding surprise rounds, is going to be my least favorite of the initiative systems. Example, players go first and all take their turns and all the monsters are killed, or the big bad is killed before ever going. Wow, that was a great combat. The players may feel like badasses for half a second, but ultimately that's boring and anticlimactic. Not to mention a complete waste of time for the DM, who had to take the time to plan and prep that encounter. At number 5, I have Clockwise Initiative, which is honestly the same as Group Initiative, except more organized because the DM doesn't have to jump around the table, but just go in order from left to right. This is the ICRPG Initiative. At number 4, I have Rolled Initiative. Now, I know there are plenty of players who like to soup up their characters so they can win the initiative and make the first move. But like I said, any system that can result in all the players taking their turns before the monster is not my favorite. But at least in this initiative system, there's an element of randomness, so the monster can get mixed in the initiative on the first turn. But once that first turn is over, you're back to all the players going and then the monster. At number 3, Tandem Initiative. Tandem Initiative is when you break up the party into groups and then take turns. So let's say you have a party of 4. 2 players would go and then the monster, and then the 2 players and then the monster. With this initiative, you can re-roll initiative with the players to switch up who goes with who, or you can just decide beforehand who will go with who and just go in that order. This does give the monster more opportunities for attack if there is just one, but let's face it, 1v4 is rarely an interesting battle to begin with. This at least adds a little bit more scare into the battle and can also allow for the players to do some really cool combo moves. At number 2, Reverse Initiative. This one I got from the Cogent system. With the initiative, the highest number goes last. But unlike all the previous initiative systems, the player's turn doesn't resolve until everyone goes. For example, the player with the lowest initiative roll, let's say the fighter, declares his action. I'm going to hit the evil wizard with my sword. The next player, the cleric, says she's going to cast Guiding Bolt on the wizard. The evil wizard, having the highest initiative, gets to react to the other's actions. So he declares to cast Counterspell or Shield as his reaction to prevent the guiding bolt from hitting him. Then casts Fireball on the fighter and or cleric, depending how close they are, whoever he perceives as the biggest threat for this action. And they all roll their dice to see what happened. I like this system because everything happens at once, and it allows the person with the highest initiative to react to what the other players and monsters are doing and then trying to counter them. It also means players may come up with some more creative actions than the normal swinging the sword business, and can result in the DM coming up with some cool abilities for characters and monsters. Let's say the cleric had the highest initiative. In this case, the evil wizard would not have been able to cast shield or counterspell because he couldn't react to it in time. The cleric was faster in this case. The system works really well with ICRPG because of its simplicity in actions, abilities, spells, and the target system. For example, if the target is 12 and the wizard was able to cast shield as his reaction, then new target for the fighter and the cleric's attacks is 15 because now it's a hard action. But what are the downfalls of this system? Well, it can be confusing, or the DM could lose track of everyone's actions. In this system, you re-roll initiative at every round, but I do find this system to be more realistic in terms of having your turn being based on your reaction to someone else rather than just having each player resolve their turn before everyone else goes. Which brings me to number 1. No initiative. I mentioned in my first ICRPG video, the ICRPG is better than D&D, that I don't use initiative in my games and that I use Professor Dungeon Master's no initiative system over at Dungeon Craft. I highly recommend checking out his video, but I did want to make sure to cover a few things that he doesn't that I faced in my own games. But first, let's break it down real quick. At the beginning of each round of combat, I put on a 2-minute timer. During those 2 minutes, the players can strategize their attacks. This is perfect when having a new player in the group because the veteran players can help them to figure out what to do. This time limit also rushes those spellcasters to figure out what to do because, well, that's combat. In real combat, you don't have time to look through all your spells. But this does make that process a little bit more manageable with ICRPG, where all the spells are 1 to 2 line spells, so they're much easier to look through. It also gives the DM time to decide what all the monsters are going to do. After those 2 minutes are up, I go around the table in ICRPG's usual clockwise fashion and have each player declare their action. Then everyone rolls. This can sometimes be hard in D&D, when you have actions, bonus actions, reactions, and spell saving throws, but I'll get to that in a moment. Everyone rolls the dice. To make it easy on myself, I have everyone take their die and place it next to their character's miniature, and I place all the die I rolled next to the monsters or monster because if this is a boss battle, you better believe that he has more than one action. Many bosses in D&D have legendary actions. But anyways, I then quickly remove all the dice that missed as to focus on who hit. Side note, I will have the players add their modifier and turn their die to that new number before placing it next to their character, just so I don't have to ask. I personally like to have people roll their damage with their attack rolls to quicken things and just ask what the damage was for those who hit and record that as I'm trying to figure out who did what. I also tell players if they were hit without telling them the damage yet, in case they want to cast any reactionary spells or have any abilities that they can use to react with. And after figuring out all of the outcomes, I narrate the scene for the players and tell them the damage. Range attacks hit before melee, with magic counting as a ranged attack. Since you can likely hit someone before they can get to you with their movement, melee attacks happen simultaneously, so even if you kill your target, they can still get in a blow or two. Sometimes the players use this time they have while I'm figuring out what happened to decide what they're going to do in the next round. Sometimes they chat amongst themselves, and sometimes they stare intently with the suspense building, waiting to hear what just happened. Regardless, there is always good energy around the table and not people bored waiting for their turn or talking amongst themselves while I'm talking to a certain player about their turn. Even if they are talking amongst themselves, in my scenario, I'm too distracted with figuring out what happened to pay any attention to it. Narration is always more interesting in this way and more dramatic, cinematic, and even deadly, as combat should be. The no initiative system works far better with ICRPG than in D&D. As I mentioned, things can get tricky with reactions and saving throws, as saving throws put the roll on the monster instead of the character, and reactions can interrupt the narration and add in a little confusion. That's why before I narrate, I make sure to tell the player whether or not they hit or if their character was hit, so they can tell me if they want to do anything else first. I like ICRPG better for this because there are a lot less actions, reactions, bonus actions, and saving throws in it. In ICRPG, you roll to cast anyway, so a spellcaster is going to roll like every other player regardless. A saving throw might be involved, but also might not. Having said that, if you are playing D&D and a magic user casts a spell that requires a saving throw, I recommend that instead of rolling another dice on top of the attack dice that the monster already rolled, just use the die they rolled for their attack as their saving throw and their attack. You already have enough to keep track of as the DM, so don't make it harder on yourself. Professor Dungeon Master never mentioned saving throws, so this gave me some trouble when I first tried implementing it. The D20 you roll at the beginning of combat is the outcome of your turn, with a few exceptions. This will simplify and shorten your combats. Professor Dungeon Master also doesn't talk about opportunity attacks, which aren't strictly in the rules in ICRPG. Now, if you watch anyone fighting, are they even close enough in combat where if they ran away, the other person could get in a hit? Not really. It's not realistic. As Professor Dungeon Master tells it, they stand far enough apart to be out of range, move in close to exchange blows, and then back away. Now, if I were surrounded by enemies, that's one thing. So it's more situational in ICRPG than a hard, fast rule. But if you try to remove that in D&D, you have issues as there are classes that are dependent on being able to disengage as a bonus action and overpowered feats that prevent you from getting away. But I digress. One other scenario you may come across is trying to hit moving targets and resolving turns with multiple attacks. So first, the moving target. Maybe you're a Dragonborn trying to hit enemies with your lightning breath weapon. And at the start, they are all in a line, but as soon as everyone declares their action, they move out of the line. So you thought you were going to hit them, but maybe not so much. This is where placing the dice part comes into play. Let's say there were 3 enemies in that line. The Dragonborn rolled a 15. 2 of the enemies rolled under that, and 1 rolled higher. In this scenario, I'd see you were able to hit 2 of them before they moved, but missed 1 as he got out of the way before you could let it off. Now, over to multiple actions. Let's use that as an example of the legendary monster having 4 actions. Fighting against 4 players, maybe in one turn, the monster had 2 high rolls and 2 low rolls, and all the characters' rolls were at least higher than the 2 low rolls. And in this turn, they reduced the monster to 0. This is very situational, but you as the DM can decide whether or not it got those last 2 hits in, or if it was defeated before it could. This is the power of narration. You look at the results of the round and make it make sense and make it sound really cool. And all the attacks and the initiatives were decided in that 1 roll instead of 2, maybe even more. Clearly, I prefer no initiative. If you'd like some more examples, again, check out Professor Dungeon Master's video. I'll include the link below, as he has a few examples to show you and really goes in more in depth on how it works. And I hope some of the examples I gave are helpful as well. Last thing I'll say is that I do still use ICRPG's Clockwise Initiative in everything except combat. In my video, ICRPG is better than D&D, I talk about how I like having my players take turns outside of combat because it organizes the table and makes sure everyone gets a turn to talk about what their character wants to say or do. Turns in ICRPG can be moments, minutes, hours, or days. Everyone plays a little different and has their own social confidence. I don't want those things to keep them from having fun at my table. Hopefully, this video gives you something to think about and gives you some ideas for your own table, whether you're playing ICRPG or not. Thanks for listening. And again, if you enjoyed the content and want to hear more, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons and comment on any other ICRPG content you'd like to hear more about in the future. Again, I'm Dr. Sean, and I'm the Nerd Doctor, here to diagnose what's wrong with your video and here to help you fix it.